Again, I'm Mike Isensee. I know quite a few of you in here from dairy inspections. And thanks for being here. And I'm really going to walk through 1 week in the fall, October 16th to the 20th. It was when we switched from summer to fall, or dry season to wet season. And so we did, that Monday we did an aerial flight in all 3 counties up here, Snohomish, Skagit, and Whatcom counties. I'm just showing pictures here from Whatcom County today, figuring that would be most relevant to most of you in the room. And there's about 30 different facilities that I have pictures of. They show good, bad, indifferent, and in more than a few cases, maybe unclear about what was going on. But I think they give you a sense of the flavor about what we saw that week, and then I'll get into some of the follow-up we did and some of the sampling. I'm going to wrap up with a little bit about our international border and sampling there, and so that's where we're headed. So if you don't currently use it, I highly recommend checking out Rufus and his weather forecasts. Here on October 9th, he's telling you a week in advance, it's going to change next week. He's more often than not pretty spot on with his long-range forecasts. I have found him over this last year to be the best thing going on. So that's on the 9th. By that Friday, he does these updates twice a week, Monday and Friday. He's nailing it, 5 to 6 fronts moving through, one after the other, multiple inches of rain, localized flooding. The National Weather Service, you know, it's a much shorter window, but this was on Sunday, they're showing that. They're showing big rain coming. On Monday, they're backing off a little bit, and what we actually ended up with was pretty close. We saw 6 inches that week, from Monday to Monday. Just over 4 inches in that time period that the National Weather Service was doing the forecast for. So they were overestimating a little bit, but it came in spades that week. And so this is broken down into 3 different areas. I'm going to go through storage, applications, first liquid, then solids, and then some pasturing. So let's do it. So from the air, it's a really great way, you know, as I said, we covered 3 counties. We were up in the air for about 2.5 hours. I don't know how many miles we flew, but we did a lot of miles. And throughout those 3 counties, we saw certainly the vast majority of the dairies in the 3 counties. So it's a great way to get a real quick snapshot of what's going on the landscape. So you get to see storage in really great situations like this. Everything's empty. It makes me smile when I see it. You see good grass banks, you see things that look really great going into the change in the season. More empty storage. Not so empty storage. Let's see, do I have a pointer here on the top?
Yes, the red.
Okay. Yep. So here we are, we're heading into the wet season. We have a nearly full upright, we have a nearly full pit. Well, over full pit. We also have a very full solids area, not where you want to be heading into the wet season. Another instance, nearly full storage, very badly managed. You probably can't see it, but it has a lot of vegetation growing on top. And a transition for storage, so this is a small storage structure. It's nice, it's nearly empty. But it begs the question about, in my mind a little bit, in this case, about where they did their last application. Throughout my slides, you'll see these yellow lines are the nearby waterways. So maybe not great setbacks, maybe there's some other areas that might have been a better final application for this place. Which leads us into applications. So applications in general, I will tell you that, you know, I'm heading here, this is finishing up 6 years of doing inspections up here, and especially in the Portage Bay watershed or the western half of the county, I've watched a sea change in the 6 years. Things are different than when I started 6 years ago. People are minding their P's and Q's like never before, and it shows in the data. I mean, what Meg said this morning, it's making a difference in terms of what we're measuring when we collect water samples, and in the river and downstream, you can see a difference. So honestly, especially in the Portage Bay watersheds, there was not a lot of applications to take pictures of. And in many cases, better applications don't make good pictures, so you don't take pictures of them. But you get a picture like this, it has a setback, and in this case, something that's interesting thinking about application fields and producers and custom applicators, you guys know this with your fields, is that you have what looks from the air, maybe like, oh, that's not so great. You may know it's a great field because it's higher, drier, it has better infiltration capacity. It really gets into, is it the right field at that time? So like this one for this site isn't necessarily a bad one. It has some setbacks. Here's another one. Maybe not the best setbacks, but we'll get into looking at some results here. But again, knowing these fields, this wasn't necessarily, in my mind, a bad application. I know these fields they get probably this time of year, that'd be a miserably bad setback. Heading into the wet, as long as it got in the ground, and like, if I look at an enlargement of this, I'm seeing no ponding. I'm assuming that manure got out there and is in the ground where it needs to be. The setback, hopefully less important unless we start that rain week with a major goalie washer that's going to get overland flow. Pretty good setbacks, a little bit of ponding in the field, whether that's because I'm seeing it really soon after those pulls or about that field in general. Not a great setback. This is an interesting one. It shows a pole that started and had been shut down. And thinking about later in the week, that pole, they didn't do that pole. So they started it and thought better of it. They didn't start it in where I'd like them to start it. So it's a good and bad call in that case. Not great setbacks, but there are setbacks there, and that's actually something of a change. It used to be when we started doing some aerial flights, we would see applications like this, and you would be able to see where the turnaround had extended over ditches, and those ditches were probably dry. But at that final application, and if that was the case here, you would have been getting runoff later in the week from this. So those are the kinds of changes we're seeing that are making the difference. Good application out in the middle of the field, but follow up with the picture here at the ends of the field, maybe not so good. And that gets into, and I'll wrap up with some thoughts at the end about applications and what we're seeing. Pretty poor setbacks here with this application. Pretty poor setbacks with this application, and I'll talk about this one here in a minute with some follow-up. And also very bad setbacks I can see, I don't know if you can, but ponding out in the field still. And so this is Monday, we're flying in the morning, it started raining that afternoon, and it didn't stop. Moving into some solids applications, this one is out on grass fields. That's probably thinking about solids applications, not necessarily a bad idea when you're looking at later applications. Looking at good setbacks. I walked this field subsequently and it looked good. Good setbacks with solids application. This is what we more typically see. It's on bare ground following corn. That bare ground, depending on the field and solids, it's one of those areas that I think there's probably still room for improvement out in the landscape, because those solids are a gift that can keep on giving for weeks and weeks, because they don't get in the ground like your liquid does. I mean, that first rain, say on Monday, if you had a decent application, that first rains are putting it in the ground where it belongs. solids, you're going to not get them in the ground. So if that's a field that's going to get saturated or getting overland flow subsequently, that's going to be a problem. Similarly, there's some setbacks with solids out in the field. We have liquid on the other side with setbacks. But depending on the field, it may become a problem, and especially for those solids later on. Similar here, where setbacks were used for solids application, but probably thinking about this field, not a good place. It's going to get too wet before those solids break down and the bacteria is gone there. And some pasture pictures. Some beef cows. Interesting, you know, these pastures, you can't necessarily tell unless you zoom in on the picture. The pastures are in great condition. There's good grass. There's not beat up areas. And yet, especially this one on the north, I drove by there later in the week and it has surface water flowing off of it. The cows that are out there, surface water, grass, it doesn't really matter. Any of that manure that they've left out there recently in the areas that are flowing off is interfacing with that surface water, and it's a problem. Pasturing in that, as we get toward the rain, is very similar to solid manure application. That it can be the gift that keeps giving. Similar here, you know, lots of our pasturing, it's all about the timing. So seeing cows out in the day as we're heading into rain, even the weeks heading into rain, is pretty questionable. Beat up area, not what you want to see. I'm going to guess that that ditch was dry that day, but by the end of the week it definitely wasn't. Wet area, bad pasture management. Here we have pastured cows along the river. That's probably not a bad idea, bad problem, but this is the berm for flooding in this area. I don't know what the river did in that next week, but if it rose above its typical bank, that's not the right place, in my mind, to be wrapping up your pasture system. And so some of the results that we saw out in the field, you know, this is just the next day. Great result in the ditch. I don't know, we don't have results from later in the week there. They may or may not have been great, but I'll just give you what we have. So this one, just to give you some context, it's this field in orange. It has some challenges that it has both a field tile through it and swale, low ground. It ended up having a pretty substantial discharge. Carried through, that's Friday of that week, carried into the following week. I will point out, however, this big number here, that wasn't from that field, that was from somewhere else. There's not just one problem out in the landscape. There's 4 follow-up samples downstream of this pasture situation. The day that those animals were out there, that water is super clean, 9. That's what we see downstream here throughout the year until we got water moving through on those pastures, and then it goes up. Goes up for a couple weeks and then it's back down and good. This one we followed up, walking the fields, the ditches were dry, and that was by Friday. So may have looked bad from the air, but that's why we like to get out on the ground. You can't tell from the air. In many cases, if what you're seeing is going to be a problem, but on the ground, that's the proof's sort of in the pudding there. In this case, the area in red here, they weren't done applying when we were in the air. They kept applying into the afternoon. That was the last area, and that was the area that ran off. Near as I can tell, the other applications, with nominal setbacks, they were fine on these soils. This is a pretty sloping area, but that one final application area became his problem. So here's a map of sample results from that week, Wednesday through Friday, October 18th to the 20th. Lots of orange and red dots throughout the county where samples were collected. Sumas area stands out for having sort of the worst water quality overall, though it certainly isn't unique in that regard. and this isn't necessarily like horrible bad news. This was our first flush for the fall in terms of what's going on. And so I expect to see higher than, I don't expect to see a green map on the first flush. I'd love to see a green map, but we know that we see bacteria moving off through a lot of different systems then. And so we had a lot of colors. So the orange here is above 200, then we go into gradations of red that gets into 1,000 and 10,000 counts. We saw a pretty similar map all the way into December though, with this is during, before we got really cold, but this was pretty cold weather, very wet week in the week leading up to Christmas. We shouldn't be seeing these kinds of numbers by this late in the season, and they're, in my mind, they're speaking more to problems of various sorts, less likely application problems, so I won't say that necessarily for north of the border. Those may be application problems because there's just a lot less regulation going on up there. And I'll say that a lot of the counts that we're seeing in the fish trap area may well relate to water coming across the border. And so we're cognizant of that when we're seeing these and we're looking at the map and looking at the results is, well, how does that relate to where any samples that are further upstream? And so I'll do that as a lead into some border sample results. So Meg this morning walked you through the map, and she talked about that there's this handy-dandy little button you can push. If you push on a sample site and you're looking at the data, you can push a little arrow at the bottom right of the results, and you can pull up a table of all the results associated with the site. I did that and pasted them in for the time period October 16th through the end of the year for different border sites here. First two here, Cave Creek and Bertrand Creek, especially Cave Creek, which is a smaller tributary. Some super high counts, probably the highest counts that we're seeing in the county on an ongoing basis are coming across the border there. Here's Jackman Ditch on the left, and which is also called Perry Homestead Brook north of the border, and a tributary that comes in. It actually is looking a lot cleaner in general than what we've seen in past years. We'll see if that holds on through the winter and spring months. But much better than Bertrand Creek, and much better than Double Ditch. I don't know if you can read these, but we've had a lot of counts in Double Ditch, above 1,000. And multiple times where we're seeing those counts carry on through the system. It's very challenging from a regulatory standpoint to hold your guys' feet to the fire when upstream there's this problem. And so there has been some traction up there. We do finally have a conduit to be passing on when we're seeing those elevated counts, as Meg said this morning, and are doing that. And they're just working on a regulatory scheme. So I'm not picturing that we're going to see a motion north of the border in terms of actual enforcement on this stuff for another couple of years, honestly. And this is the far right's Fish Trap Creek and then Ossink Road Ditch, which in past years has always been clean at the border, but now a couple of times we've seen some actual counts coming across the border there. It didn't start flowing until late November, which speaks to the variation in our soil types and where we're seeing runoff. So here's two quick links. I know Meg talked about the map. This link will take you to that map where all the different agencies are posting their results. And then we're also maintaining what's called a story map and putting a little bit of information each week up there about what we're seeing on the landscape. We'll be working with our partners to be putting up stories throughout the 3-county area. And we're putting just a summary about what the WSUA weather stations, one bellwether station in each county, just to give a sense about what the precip was over the week. That's what the front page looks like, and I just want to wrap up with a couple of take-homes. And this may be Nicole may be getting into this too, but for applications, I've really seen folks making the effort, looking at the weather forecast in a way that they didn't used to, and paying attention to it, paying more attention to what are good fields to get on at different times. I do think that where we have room still for improvement is really looking at the soil. You know what is good fields in terms of its holding capacity, but then looking at what kind of, how much do we have left in that soil profile? So what kind of available water holding capacity is there? Can your manure get in the ground before the rain comes? And if you're getting to applying on that Monday before the rain comes, can it get in the soil before the rain comes? So what's that infiltration rate getting into the soil? I think that's an area that we have room for improvement for applications. But I am seeing it happening earlier in the fall, overall, which is great. And that there's just overall improved management. So staying a little bit back from ditches that may be dry, where in the past that's not what I was seeing. I do think those little things matter. Some of the things that I think are still challenges on the solids is fall solids, I think, is a challenge, and having adequate storage for solids, or good places to go for them. I think it's a research question about if we get in there and incorporate those in the fall, is that better than not? Is putting them on grass in the fall the right way to go? I think there's reasonable questions to figure out there. Removing animals in heavy use area or pasture situations. I'm still seeing that people in places that are prone to runoff need to do that sooner. And then for applications, I think the big risks, I think overall things are going better, are the risk areas in individual fields. So places where I see problems are that you have half of a field, or you have a north half and a south half that are great, and a middle part that's bad, or you have part of a field that's good and part that's bad, and so it's actually separating out and telling your custom applicator or you to go, we're only covering the part that's the low risk, and getting beyond that we're going to do a whole field, I think both fall and spring, that's an area of managing risk. Managing it in places, the one picture that I showed, good application out in the middle of the field, but out at the ends of the field where you're turning around equipment all season long for chopping, especially where it's near entrance and exit to a field, where the soil is going to be compacted. Those are going to be the places that you're going to get runoff before anywhere else in the field. So looking at not, is the field a high risk, but what parts of the field can I manage differently? I think that's another great frontier that we have ahead of us. And I'm got to give you guys kudos, because it's nice to be up here and talking about that level of management versus we gotta wait longer in the spring to apply, period, or it's a much more nuanced level, and it speaks to the efforts folks are putting into it, which it's not unnoticed, at least at my level, so thank you about that. And finally, and I know for a lot of the dairies that I inspect, I think future frontiers are areas that we've traditionally managed to divert away from storage, and we don't want to store necessarily, but that they're sources of pollution at times. So that includes roofs, driveways, feed areas. There are both research questions there that hopefully the CD is going to help with, but then there's the bigger questions of what is the right management solutions. And I know we have some efforts going on that I think are moving us in the right direction, seeing what works in different places, but that's one more area that I think we still have room to go. So thank you guys.
Questions?
And yeah, questions. Don't all be shy.
You talked about cattle on fields before a rain event. How long do you recommend taking them off before a rain event?
I don't think there's a single answer for that. It depends. In the case of the pictures where we got the high counts, those low counts on October 16th, and then it was high counts for the next 2 weeks after that, I've recommended to that producer in the past that he take his cows off of those areas that are prone to flooding or saturation on the summer fall equinox, so September 22, and ideally get out there and do some field work. So don't just leave your cow pies out there. But I think it really depends on the soil type and what you have. In that situation, those fields I know get saturated and flood really soon with the fall rains almost every year. In other instances, it's going to be different. And so it may not be very long. There's the heavy use area picture that probably needed to be sooner. And getting some seed down so you had something holding on to it. So I think it's different in each case.
I'm wondering, Portage Bay Shellfish, Portage Bay is closed conditionally 6 months of the year. And when we asked them in the past, can you relate it to rainfall events or not, they claimed no, that they were basing the data from 20 years ago. Do you feel like you're getting a better feeling with the data that we're seeing now that more of the counts those high counts are coming only in rainfall events? Or are we sometimes seeing high counts in non-rainfall events too?
Honestly, I can't say I've looked at the data enough to say that, but in general, we're seeing our map light up with high rainfall events. But looking at, say, maybe the river station, I think that's an interesting question to see. But yeah. I think that's more likely than not the case, especially at least in the fall and maybe in the spring too.